So as we had our conversation yesterday, Larry, I was ending the program and you said, yeah, but I like what was going to happen next. So we've decided to come back to it because I think there's plenty more to discuss. And so what do you say? Uh,
Why not?
all right. So
I've never been known to be at loss for words.
yeah, that's right. So yesterday, I think we had determined more or less that when it comes to McDonald's eating out, it's gotten way more expensive. I think that's where we left off. But there was way more to that story, of course. If people didn't watch it yesterday, I highly recommend they go back. I will put a card up later before we end the show to where people can go back, or you could just look up, the channel and find yesterday's program. But I think it was a very valuable session. So shall we listen to what was the next stage? Or
And just for everybody's information, in case they didn't see yesterday's show, we're talking about the All In podcast, the most recent version, the most recent session. I think it was released yesterday, right?
it comes out on Friday, each week on Friday.
Okay.
And it's usually a great watch. And this is not something that Larry and I are covering because we think it's too hard to understand. Anybody can pretty much understand what these guys are talking about. We're just adding our own thoughts on top of it. And in fact, in this particular session, I'm going to disagree with them a couple of times, and I'm going to hopefully help them with some more recent charts because sometimes they didn't go to the trouble to get the right chart. So,
right. But one thing we should say, though, and I think we said this yesterday at length, we've both been debating the reality of the economic situation. And, I've raised and you raised concerns about how the government measures the economic activity. And, I've held that we've had a recession, a fairly significant recession going on, while the Federal Reserve is telling us just how good things are and, what a fantastic economy we have. And I think yesterday's All In Pod, or Friday's All In Pod, really underscored the extreme difficulty that many people are having in this economy, and that for a very large proportion of our population, this is a very real recession, a very painful recession. Anyway, so back to you.
Yeah, and you're such a fan of the All In guys that you're even wearing the shirt.
Yeah, this was some of the stuff we scored at I think the first All In conference. That was in Miami, Miami Beach, I think, 3 years ago. And then last year I was at the All In podcast conference, and that was in Los Angeles at UCLA. We met there, actually.
Yes, that's true. That's exactly where we had a chance to meet. Yep.
And I decided not to go this year because honestly, didn't feel that last year's organization was that well done, and didn't really enjoy. Although the programming was really better last year than it was in Miami, really excellent programming, but the organization was catastrophic. And
I see. All right.
Anyway.
Well, I'm not gonna go either, but it's only because it cost I forget how much, and it's way more than I could justify. All right, let's go ahead and listen to the very next section here.
People. And the experts have some statistics on their side, but the old saying goes, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And then the American people have their actual lived experience on their side. They know what they're feeling. And I tend to trust in that. And obviously, we're in an election year, and the press knows that. So they're trying to do this big cleanup effort for Biden. But why is it that people are feeling this way? Number one is inflation. And if you look at this chart, you can see that if you look at household net worth since the start of the Biden presidency and compare it to the change in household net worth at a similar point in Trump's presidency, in nominal terms, it appears to be the same. But then if you adjust for inflation, in other words, you look at the real household net worth, you can see that household net worth during the Biden term has been flat. Actually, it's down.
Because of inflation, right?
Because of inflation.
Where did the inflation come from?
Where did the inflation come from?
Yeah.
Well, Larry Summers warned in the first quarter of the Biden administration that if you passed an unnecessary $2 trillion of COVID stimulus, you would produce inflation.
So let's start there. Not necessarily challenging whether the Biden people did it right or the Trump people did it right. They'll be talking about a lot more of that later in the show, but rather just the whole concept of why people are feeling broke, why they're feeling stretched, why they're feeling uncertain in this economy, which seems to be going along okay. And this chart gives us, and now again, these are just more statistics, but the statistics would indicate they're not doing well.
Yeah, if you look at the nominal value, that is before inflation, you'll see that the Biden graph, that's the blue line, the Biden line, tracks quite well the Trump line. In fact, the first 18 months, nominal income was higher rose at a higher rate than it rose under Trump. However, once you adjust for inflation, you'll see that after the first 14 or 15 months in the Biden administration, then income dropped dramatically. I would say almost catastrophically. I've not seen a drop quite as sharp as that in a very long time. I don't know if I've ever seen a drop, maybe in the beginning of 2009, but that is an enormous drop. And that's because inflation just shot through the roof, hit 9%, I believe, at one point, as a result of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. It was actually an Inflation Increase Act, it should have been an IIA, because it gave rise to a massive burst of inflation. Quite something, something that we've never seen before.
Well, and even before the IRA, there was also the next, how much was it? I forget the amount of the check. We got a second stimulus check at the beginning of the Biden administration. Then we had the infrastructure.
I think that was only 700 billion, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I don't remember the number, but it was not insignificant. And then we had, in addition to that, the Infrastructure Act. We had the CHIPS Act,
7 trillion.
then the CHIPS Act, then the IRA. So we had all four.
You're right. Yeah, I actually misspoke. It wasn't the IRA that did it. It was, in fact, the inflation.
No,
the original stimulus.
The original, right.
Yeah, the 1.7 trillion stimulus that really put it over the top.
Exactly. Also, just to let everybody know, it's easy enough to get this wrong. This is the household net worth since the start of the presidency, not the income. And what we're seeing here, obviously, is the beginning of the term in the Biden years. And again, not say anything negative. It is what it is. The incomes the net worth was going up. Why? Because people were putting money in their savings account. They were putting money in their checking account, and they were paying down their credit cards. So when you're talking about, when you're talking about Larry's net worth, are the guys on the program, their net worth probably went up during this time, and people that were in the stock market, their net worth probably went up during this time. But when you're talking about the average American, if they get an extra $700 that they weren't expecting, or they get an extra couple of $1,000 that they're not expecting, they can use that money immediately to either improve their savings or reduce their credit card. And that's exactly what happened. We talked about this on the show a year ago as to how much people were putting into savings and how much they were reducing their credit cards. But that's all turned around now. That is absolutely the opposite, where people are now saving less than the average that they have over 100 years. They're saving less than the average. And we'll see later, where their credit card debt is going up dramatically.
And what's extraordinary about this is that we reached a peak of household savings, I think in 2020. I think we reached a level that I've never seen before.
31% or something.
Yeah, never seen before in 2020. And, I was thinking to myself, this is, the most incredible situation we've ever been in. And, inflation sucked it all away in a matter of 18 months. It took those savings, and of course, people did reduce their savings, but inflation really just destroyed that whole opportunity.
Exactly. All right, well, let's go on.
The inflation rate when Biden came into office was 1.7%. We had a rip-roaring economy, but he started stimulating. And we talked about Bidenomics is this new policy of pumping trillions of dollars of stimulus into a healthy economy, which we've never done before. What happened? Inflation went all the way to 9%. So people's wages have not kept up with the rate of inflation. This is why they feel worse off. When you actually look at purchasing power, people are worse off in terms of their actual ability to buy things. Their purchasing power has gone down. Wages may have gone up a little bit, but they have not gone up as much as inflation. So people feel worse off. Now, Larry also had that, I think, really informative study showing that inflation would have peaked at 18% if you include cost of borrowing. So again, to Chamath's point, if you're trying to get a mortgage and you're paying 7.5%, 8%, you feel way worse off. If you need to buy a car and make a car payment, you feel much worse off. If you've got credit card debt, which is now hit at an all-time record of something like 1.1 trillion, your credit card rates have never been higher.
Right.
So this is something which I think I don't actually understand it, Larry. Maybe you can help me because you share the name with Larry Summers. But I don't understand why the interest rate was taken out of the CPI. It makes no sense to me. It is a part of your average expense. It's a part of your expenses. You're paying if you can get an.
I think the interest component of what you pay out is, of course, in the CPI, and I think that's why you don't reflect the rate, you reflect the actual outgoing. So
No, I don't think they're reflecting that. That's kind of my point, is that
interest paid on credit card debt must be part of the CPI.
I don't think so, Larry.
Oh, sorry, I'm wrong. Of course I'm wrong. Interest paid on credit card debt is part of the gross domestic product, not
Right.
the CPI.
Yes.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Yes. And so if you are buying a house and you've got a 2%, 2.5%, we'll call it 3% interest rate, and then you turn it around and 3 years later or 2 years later, you're paying 7% for that same house, that's part of your payment, and it's very much a part of inflation. And so Larry Summers, who I don't always agree with, but in this particular case, he's been talking about this now for a couple of years. Why that's not in the numbers, I have no idea. And what he's saying is the overall inflation rate, going back to the way they did it in the 80s before they changed it, into the 80s, we were still counting interest in that inflation. I mean, sorry, in the inflation rate, CPI. We would have had 18% inflation this last couple of years. Well, no wonder people are hurting.
Yep. No, what you say is absolutely correct, and it's reflected in what's happened to the price of some goods, which are interest rate sensitive.
Yeah, and then I was shocked. I had no idea. I think they're going to show the chart in a minute. Let's let them go on, and we'll talk about this in a second.
So the average American feels worse off because cost of borrowing has a huge impact on their household finances. And that's why if you read like one of the last paragraphs in that story that you referred to, they use the key words, the consumer feels squeezed, the average household feels squeezed. They may not have lost their job yet, but they've lost purchasing power and they've lost.
They're under earning. They're under earning. And so the projection.
So this is obvious. And the press can gaslight us all day long about how wonderful things are under Biden, but the average American, I think, understands differently based on their own experience.
I think the whole thing comes down to the projection of an individual or a household of their lived experience onto the economy. You assume that because you're having a tough time, the economy is bad. that and the economy as a definition for them is how do I earn and how do I spend? And if I'm under earning, that means there must be serious job loss and things are more expensive and my ability to purchase isn't improving. And so I think we're all kind of going to end up on the same take on this one. I mean, Nick, if you want to pull this image up, this is, I think, a helpful one, which is disposable personal income relative to outlays, that folks are needing to spend more than they're making. So clearly indicating that they're feeling like they're under earning. So the projection of that is the economy is bad without recognizing that it is an inflationary experience, whereas economists use the definition of quote, economic growth being gross production, gross product. And so if gross product or gross revenue is going up, they're like, oh, the economy is healthy, we're growing. But the truth is, we're funding that growth with leverage.
Okay, so it hasn't been that long ago, Larry. I don't talk about this a lot. I don't mind talking about it, but it wasn't that long ago. It was in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011 that I was broke. I had the, what do you want to call it? The perfect storm of health problems in my family, along with the economic problems of 2008, along with problems with my corporation my reasonably large company that I own, all three happening in exactly the same time, and I ended up broke. So it's a real lived experience for me recently to know what it is like to go to the grocery store or to go to the gas pump and be stretched to be able to take care of that bill, to be able to pay that bill. So
we've all been there. I mean, there are very few of us who have not been there. I've been there.
Right. So folks today, a year ago, they were looking at maybe a couple of $1,000s in credit card debt at 14%. Today, they might be looking at $6,000 in credit card debt at 21%. And that's a big difference in their monthly expense. And this is not being included in the CPI. Then you have what we'll show in a minute of a trip to McDonald's. Somebody showed yesterday, they were talking about a movie theater. This was not on the All In podcast. It was on another thing I was watching. A trip to the movie theater costing them, for a family of four, was costing them something like $85. Now they bought the popcorn, which I think is always foolish, but still $85 for a trip to the movies.
I think a trip to the movies is foolish.
Okay, there you go.
Why would you go to the movies today? Just to see another blockbuster of, mayhem and explosions and, some funny looking people. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I mean, people seem to enjoy it. I have no idea how they find any enjoyment in it. But your point is very well made. And I think there's a corollary to all of this. Since when did credit card companies get to be able to charge 20% interest? I mean, it's ridiculous. If the base level interest is 5% on short-term debt, how do they get a surcharge of 15, 16%? How? When credit card, when interest rates were 3 and 4 and 5% back in 2008, credit card debt was 14, 16%. So I don't understand where they suddenly get that extra, 10% of additional interest. That's a subject for another day.
It's a subject for another day. I'll just say that part of it has to do with these incentives. So everybody loves the incentives. Somebody has to pay for the incentives, the cash back or the trips, the points. I know business people today that pay all of their business expenses, all their purchases, all their everything they do is on their credit card because they get the points. Well,
Yep.
who's paying for those points? Not the people that are paying off their credit card every month. It's the people that don't pay off their credit card every month that are paying those points to those folks that are accumulating.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
So, all right, let's. But this disposable personal income versus outlay and savings is really indicative of what's going on. So, this is again talking about the person I'm going to say the person that's under 75,000, maybe even under $100,000 in family income, and the average family income today is around 80. We'll see that chart in a minute. The person that's under that average is the person who's probably the most strapped. They've got a couple of kids, they've got their, all the regular expenses, but their income is not keeping up, and they've spent all the money from the COVID years, and now their outlays are greater than their income. This is not sustainable. Okay, let's go on.
At the national level, the federal level, and at the household and domestic level, we are borrowing money to inflate the revenue numbers. And so the GDP goes up, but the debt is going up higher. And so the ability for folks to support themselves and buy things that they want to buy and continue to improve their condition in life has declined. Things are getting worse. And if you go to the next image, as Sachs pointed out already, here's the image of total outstanding credit card debt, over $1 trillion. It's totally spiked, and it's going to continue to spike just like federal debt because of the next chart, which is the sudden jump in interest rates. So we've seen credit card interest rates jump from 12% on average 10 years ago to 21.19% right now. And it was at 14% at the end of 2022. So we've gone from 14% average credit card interest rates to 22% now in just about 20 to 24 months. And so the projection that I think of the quote economy must be bad is resulted from the fact that income to spending is actually pretty negative. So here's the real median family income. This actually only goes through 2019, so it doesn't even capture the era that we're talking about, but this has been going on for quite some time.
So this is one of the places where I did these guys a favor. And I went and got the current number. So let me go grab that, or at least more current. I won't say it's current, but it's more current. So let's take a look here. All right, so you can see what's happened here is that the median household income in the US has been falling since 2020 pretty dramatically. And my guess is that it is falling even more at this point. This is adjusted.
Is this in real dollars or nominal dollars?
Yeah, this is in adjusted for inflation dollars.
Okay.
So you can see what's happening here is now it was way over 75, getting close to $80,000 for the average family income. Now it's well under it was 74,058 as of 2022. My guess is that it's either, flat or down from there.
Yeah, I think this could argue that we have been in a household recession since, 2020. Maybe even, before that, it was falling. But if you look at 2020 as a cutoff date, the recession of 2020, the 3-month recession, 1/4 recession they declared in 2020, I think is still unabated. I think it's still raging.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about this before. If you go by category, we know that housing as a category is in recession. No question about that. And it's not necessarily because there's not a demand. It's because nobody's building the houses. So, and the people are not building the houses. I just read an article the other day. They pointed out so succinctly, it's the permitting costs, the land costs, and the lack of labor and the labor costs. The home builders are just not willing to go out and take the risk right now. And so we have this huge shortage that continues to be in place. Then you got transportation or trucking, if you will, that's been in recession. You got manufacturing in recession. When you got all of those in recession, clearly in recession now for this entire period, I guess you could say auto's been in recession too, because we've only been talking 15 million cars a year as opposed to the kind of the 17 million that you would normally think of. That's a big chunk of the economy, Larry.
Yep.
All right, let's go back.
When you look at, if you look at total household income, and you see that it's in decline, and it's been in decline for almost 3-4 years, actually.
Yes.
This is a pretty serious number. I mean, it doesn't happen often like that. It happened after the global financial crisis clearly in 2008, which lasted until 2013, 2015. But I mean, it doesn't happen that often, you know. It's really not a good situation.
Right. Now, these guys raise the issue. They say, well, the households are overspending their income, and now they're having to pay the interest rates as well. The federal government is overspending its income, as it has been pretty much for the last 50, 70 years. But Larry, do you see any hope that even if I don't see any hope if Biden is reelected, that there's any kind of cut in the spending, any kind of a break at the federal level? Do you think there's really any hope, even if Trump is elected, that he'll come in and do the Argentina thing and start cutting and slashing?
I don't see Trump doing that. He didn't do that last time. I don't think he's got the motivation to do that. You know, the Trump administration was so chaotic that you couldn't really tell from one sequence of management to the other sequence of management what the consistency was. Now, he certainly laid tariffs on China, and that set a policy which Biden has honored, and in fact has even increased. That was a consistent policy. But his his fiscal policy, it was almost impossible to tell where you were, and so I don't see anything thematic there. I think that he inherited the Obama expenditures levels, and he didn't really blow them up, and he didn't do anything serious about them. So one imagines that he's going to inherit what Biden leaves, and he's not going to really reduce them. I mean, he didn't close any major federal agencies.
No.
He didn't shutter any, major programs. So absent a really big change and a level of consistency that he hasn't been able to implement, I can't see a Trump administration being much different from where we are. Sorry to say. I mean,
yeah, and I agree with you, by the way. I see no evidence in the campaigning on either side that either side is even recognizing what a potential catastrophe this is, much less giving a solution. So at this point, no, I fully agree with you, Larry. Let's go on. Whoops. Well, here I go again. Here we go.
That the average American's ability to improve their condition has largely been driven by their ability to borrow, not by their earnings. And this has created a substantial set of precedents that we're now running into a wall with interest rates spiking and inflation hitting us because of the overall federal debt that we've taken on.
I think we're probably going to go around the horn and all agree. Obviously, the crazy spending started in the Trump and COVID era, and that caused a lot of the inflation as well, just to be fair. It's two administrations that are just out of control with spending. But the way I look at this is the Mickey D economy. People may not know this, but 96% of Americans eat meals at least once a year in McDonald's. 8% of Americans eat at McDonald's on an average day. And when you look at the prices of McDonald's here, if we look at this image.
Yeah, this is incredible. This
is unbelievable. Medium French fries at McDonald's, $1.79 in 2019, and now $4.19. And then if we look at just McNuggets,
my gosh,
$4.49 to $7.58, 68% increase. McChicken, $1.29 to $3.89. And then here is a very interesting one. This is CPI versus McDonald's. Big Mac prices. So take a look at that. As much as the consumer price index has surged, Big Macs have exceeded that. And so Americans are seeing this over and over again when they go to McDonald's and other places. And that's what's causing the feeling.
Because when you spend, go back to that McNugget chart. I just want to see what is it, end of 2019. So this is basically, you'd want to look at the 4-year stock price, right? So like these got.
So they go into a discussion here of how McDonald's.
I don't think it's not material.
Yes. So again, I think this is exactly right. What would be ways that the average family takes a look at their budget? The grocery store would obviously be number one. The gas pump. Now, interestingly, oil prices are in pretty good shape, but gasoline prices are still elevated right now. Number three would be things like eating out. That would definitely, especially fast food, but all eating out is crazy. You can barely get out of a restaurant for two right now for under $80, and usually it's over 100 by the time you pay the tip. So everywhere people are going right now, they're getting slammed with significantly higher prices. Sticker shock is everywhere. What is the solution? Is recession. Real recession.
Yeah, I'm not sure a recession is required as a solution, but a recession will certainly produce a solution. I think it is possible to manage an economy to reduce inflation and to get back to growth without a recession. Recession is a shock to the system, but I think the system can be repaired without a shock to the system, although it hasn't been done that successfully in history. So it's hard to prove my point.
Yeah, one of the ways I look at recession, Larry, is as a something that takes care of excesses. So you have your excesses in terms of the way that businesses are spending money. You have excesses in the way that individuals are spending money in their homes. You have excesses in the way that the government is spending money. And sometimes you need a shock. I think you used the shock word. You need some kind of a crisis in your home life, in your business life, or in your government life before you're willing to take the medicine. And that medicine would be things like cutting back on hiring at the government levels, cutting back on hiring at business levels. I think businesses right now, people keep talking about this, that the reason that the layoffs haven't happened is because businesses are afraid to lay off that 10% that they probably don't need or that are not that productive, because they think that they can't hire them back if they need them. And that's a luxury, Larry. That's the kind of thing that gets eliminated in a recession.
Yeah, I think the formula for success would be a reduction in the federal employment force by 25 to 33%.
That'd be great.
I think that would be, the first step. Freezing of federal salaries for a 5-year period, a reduction in federal payroll by 25 to 33%. I think we have to spend more money on the armed forces now. There's no doubt that we are so underspent. We are so underarmed. We have such a lot of so many deficits that's a very important piece that will have to be funded, and we'll have to defund a huge number of programs. That would be the right thing to do, and I would support a president, even a Trump, and I'm never Trumper, I would support even a Trump if he would essay that particular program and commit to carrying it out. The problem is that so many of these politicians will talk a great game, but they're just unable to make it happen.
Yeah.
So, that would be the formula that I would support. A 25 to 33% reduction in federal programs across the board. An increase, though, in defense spending, and there's a million ways they can spend on defense a lot better. And then, we have to get the Reserve Bank, we have to get the Federal Reserve Bank balance sheet back in order. It's crazy right now.
Right.
So I think those are, I think, the first steps to take. And then there's the problem of, getting industry operational again, getting industry back up and running. And there again, federal regulations, I would want to see, review of all federal regulations. Any federal regulation over than 25 years would have to be repassed again. I think there has to be, every federal regulation must have to be renewed every X number of years. That would be my solution. And I think that would solve a lot of these problems.
Larry, that's pretty funny because I just read an article this morning. I think it was, could have been last night, that was talking about manufactured housing. There is a law on the books, and this is a federal law on the books, that manufactured housing has to be delivered on a mobile device, and then you can't take it and put it onto a foundation. So therefore, it remains a mobile home, even though it's a full-on manufactured home. And this is a federal law that apparently they've just some congressman has just proposed a new law that would eliminate this. And the theory is that because of the low cost of manufactured housing, this would reduce the average cost of building a home by over $100,000 and would produce a very fast way to get the number of homes on the market back up quickly.
We could never allow that to happen.
No, I know, but we'll see if that takes place. But there's a perfect example of what you're talking about, where the regulations are stymieing, our next generation of kids, making it much harder for them to get a home today. I make the argument that they can still get it, but the argument I would not fail to recognize it's much harder than it used to be. Let's go on with the next section.
That means the rate of inflation's gone down from 6 or 7% down to 3% or 2.9 or 3.1. That doesn't mean prices aren't still going up. And so the question is, how do you want to cycle down?
If you want to replace GDP, there was a very good article in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago about how there's been just a total breakdown in what these high level numbers say, kind of what we've been saying and how Americans feel. And they introduced a different score. Well, they gave it publicity. It's not their score, but it's something that they call the core score.
Okay.
And what that does, I'll just read it to you just so you can understand it. It's a county level index of well-being using measures of economic security, economic opportunity, health, and political voice. And so the lowest possible score is 0, the highest possible score is 10. As it turns out, when they use this across every county in America, the distribution is basically as follows. The most quote unquote prosperous county is Falls Church, Virginia, which is a 7.86 out of 10. And the lowest county is Jim Hogg County of Texas, which has a score of 2.25. So to the extent that you want to start to look at granular measures, this is one. I'm not going to advocate for it, but it's an example. But what are you noticing here? What I notice is that there's a lot of patches of like meh to not good in most parts of America. And so other than a very few small pockets where people feel great, most of the country is.
Okay, so I stopped sharing, but I'm not sure what happened, Larry. Were you still able to hear the?
Yeah, we heard Tremont.
All right. So that was an interesting new approach that they were, that the Wall Street Journal was showing. I was not sure about political voice as a category. That seemed like an odd one that could kind of throw.
I mean, that's like DEI. I mean, it's a measure that, is very faulty, and it can be skewed, and we just don't know to what extent it skews the total number. I would contest some of that. But anyway, the point is, there is perhaps a happiness index that could be conjured up. Everybody's view of that would be different, but yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and we did talk about this yesterday, but I'm certainly I found as I continue to think about it over yesterday that it just made more and more sense to me that we have a two the system is broken into these two halves. And that's arbitrary. But we have folks that are in that South Texas situation, and we have folks that are in that Virginia situation. It's a different world. It's a different life.
Yes.
And I don't look at it in the way that, Marxists have looked at it over the ways as the good versus the, horrible people exploiting the other people. It's none of that. The folks that are doing well, in many cases, totally deserve to be doing well. They saved their money, they bought a home, they raised their kids, they've done what they, and folks at the other end of the ladder commonly have not made good choices, and they're paying the consequences of making poor choices. But whatever the reasons for where people ended up, there is now a group of folks out there. I'm just going to call it the bottom half of under 75,000 in income as a family, that are the ones that are struggling right now, and the ones over 75,000, not so much.
The biggest single indicator of poverty, is single parent household.
Right.
There's no question that has caused so much devastation in the country. And there are federal regulations that have led to that.
Right.
And those federal regulations were part of, unfortunately, the Great Society, and they've never been amended. Well, they have been somewhat amended, but they're still responsible for an enormous amount of grief and travail. And societal norms today are supporting, single head of household kind of families, and it's becoming the norm, and it's really caused a lot of poverty. People say, well, we can't afford to have children, blah blah blah, and we don't want to have children, and live a single life, and then they get married later in life. These are societal norms that are going to take years and years to, resolve and evolve into new patterns. But in the moment, single head of household is really where you talked about that cutoff. You'll find that households that are below that poverty, below that 75K level, are predominantly single family homes, or at least a vast majority. And the other, above that line, you're going to find, families with couples. So it's unfortunate, but it's reality.
Well, so Larry, that then comes down to maybe something we could spend a minute on, to the extent that folks have stayed this long, maybe they can listen to us pontificate, but it really all comes down to leadership. And as much as you're a never Trumper and I'm a 100% Trumper, I do not find that Trump does the leadership thing. And I want to go back to who I consider to be the greatest president of the 20th century, Ronald Reagan, but we could also look at JFK, who I was no fan of. The thing that those two people had in common, they have in common with somebody that you and I really admire, somebody that makes electric automobiles, and that is setting a vision and then communicating the vision.
Right.
We haven't had that person. We haven't had that person for a very long time. So a vision could include get married, have kids. That's what Elon's talking about now. Well, he doesn't necessarily follow his own advice on the get married part, but he's like, if you want to have make the right decisions in life, finish high school, go to college, maybe today. I'm not sure about that, but get a good job, get married, have kids, have a couple of 3 kids, the ecosystem, the human ecosystem is going to go away. And then make good decisions, during your lifetime, and you're going to be fine. But there's nobody at the top saying that. Elon Musk is all by himself, kind of saying it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that leadership has failed. I wouldn't put Donald Trump in the happy family category,
No, no.
and he certainly hasn't set an example in that regard. And it's just very unfortunate. Look, we have huge problems in the country that we have to overcome. And there are plenty of politicians who have some good ideas and who have really thoughtful solutions to the problem. But it's very difficult for both sides to come together and to come to a conclusion. The immigration policy is a shambles. It's caused enormous problems, and we are going to be living with this for the next 30 years. It's going to take to work its way out. I've often said it doesn't really matter in the end, because in 30 years' time, this cohort of immigrants will be, they'll be elderly, the children will be, fine, because that's the nature of the American experience. And we will have a whole new, cadre of young people, and saving us in a way, because otherwise our population would be in decline.
Right.
But we didn't have to go through the pain. We don't have to go through the pain that we're going to go through in the next 10, 20 years in order for this cohort to work itself through. So, it's just been a very serious, I think Biden administration has been a very serious problem. I think it's been incredibly dysfunctional. The student loan policy, the immigration policy, and the Inflation Causing Act, the three functional pieces of legislation that have caused all of this inflation, and have not really contributed very much to the productive capacity of the country. So it's a pity. It's just reality. And unfortunately, I don't see either of these presidential candidates addressing the root problem. I just don't see it.
Yes, as a marketer, typically it's way easier to generate enthusiasm for your products or services by looking at pain. It's not as easy, which I prefer in my life. I've always preferred to find something that I could market that would make life better. And so you would talk about how it's going to make your life better as opposed to reducing pain. So that's the bicycle industry is certainly that category where, getting out on your bike and getting fresh air and using cheaper transportation, et cetera. There was a lot of positive things to talk about. But in politics right now, it seems like everybody just wants to address the pain, whether those are pains of you're in the wrong group and so you're oppressed, or whether it's the pain that the other party is creating pain. It's all about pain, as opposed to what do you want to call it? One of the hardest things you'll ever do is try to go counter to the zeitgeist and say, okay, for 40 years, we've been pandering to our own interests, our own personal interests. We haven't been taking responsibility for our community. We haven't been even taking responsibility all the time for our families. And so it's time, folks, to go out there and be responsible and to think about the rest of the community, the rest of the country, be a patriot, and do some things that might cost you in order to build. And that's something that, again, Reagan said. He was probably the last president to do so. And I don't think we're going to get it this round, but that's my recommendation. All you politicians out there, I'm too old to do it, but maybe somebody will.
Well, I think Kennedy said it best. John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country
do for you.
Anyway, so that's where we are. We're old farts, worrying about the state of the country and the state of the world. But, the kids today, they're gonna have to carry the torch.
Well, Larry, maybe that's what we could call our show. And then you could have a new shirt. I'd send you a new shirt, be the Old Fart Show, so. With that final conclusion, I will say adieu. Larry, thanks so much for coming on again today and finishing up this two-part series. And to all of you out there, it has been great talking to you.